Hello, I'm honored to be here, and I thank Colonel McGregor for discussing skin in the game, because basically I have nothing to add, maybe a few details. So before I start my thing on 7 points that characterize a modern world that are completely different from what we have in mind. Let me mention something on skin in the game. The idea of skin in the game is that it's not so much a deterrent as much as a filter. When you drive on a highway, even on Friday night or even on New Year's Eve, you know, anyone could drive backwards, kill 15 people. Why it doesn't happen frequently? It's because you can only do it once. Drivers have skin in the game. So car accidents kill people, you kill innocent victims, but you're first to go, or you're more likely to go. So skin in the game used to be part of war. But that was my talk in 2018, so I'm not going to repeat that talk. I have something else. But so it was to be, because most commanders were on the front line. So society got rid of Sullivans and Schmullivans and all these guys, okay, by putting them in front of the line. So warmongers were more likely to die. And this is how we had control that we lost now with technology, because you could be in an air-conditioned room, kill 500,000 people, and incur no personal risk. So this time I'm going to talk, so thank you, but my talk was, my alternative talk was presented, because it's not more than that simple point, presented by Colonel. So now, what is it in a modern world? Please stop me 5 minutes before, so I can, because I can carry it on. I'm not a good speaker, and by design, because if the message can survive in spite of my poor speaking abilities, it means it's got to be powerful, all right? So, there's 7 things. Why 7 points? Because I've been studying Babylonian history, and 7 is a Babylonian number. So, and also it's good marketing. Anyway, 7 points that characterize our modern world that our educational system can't grasp. The first one, and that was the center of the Black Swan, is concentration. Winner-take-all effects. How? If you have an island, you take an island, it would have a lot of species, but it would have much higher densities of species per square meter than a continent. You open up, you're going to have fewer species because some of them will win. We had that in cultural life. The Beatles, Harry Potter, now everybody reads the same book. You can't make a living as an author now, because a few authors make most of the money, particularly in a non-fiction, in a fiction space, because either you sell 20 million or you work for Starbucks. Unless you work at Starbucks, in which case you can work for other places. I work at Starbucks personally, so anyway. So and that causes winner-take-all effects. Opera singers could make a living because there was no audiovisual. And of course, today, or as of 2000, 10 opera singers made most of the income of all opera singers. Okay, so, and that concentration is okay so long as the road from college dorms to Google remains as short as the road from Google's to college dorms. And that was the case. We saw what happened. Alta Vista disappeared in how many? 12 minutes, right? Was replaced by Google. Nothing is replacing Google. Why? Because it's getting sticky at the top, and that's unhealthy. The process of concentration in itself is not unhealthy. This market mechanism. What is unhealthy is when people become powerful. And what do we have now? It's techno-feudalism. So that's my first point on concentration. Now it applies to a lot of things. Example, viruses. It took about a week for COVID to dominate the planet. Okay, to reach, one convention in Chicago, can redistribute, across the whole planet. The bubonic plague took 330 years to go from what's Istanbul now to the north of England. You see, and of course never reached the Americas because we didn't have the same connectivity. Now, connectivity is not a problem. It's only a problem if you have an archaic textbook understanding of our, economic and social, cultural, and biological life. See? So we got to, and it is pathological, of course, if it's sticky. When I wrote Skin in the Game, I think I looked at the data, and the Forbes billionaires, you had about, I think, only 10% of the families were there 30 years, later. I mean, up till 2010, I think. In Europe, it's a reverse. And it looks like we're going to be more like Europe, but with even more concentration and more technological. So that's point one. Point two. We have problems understanding dominance in geography, mostly because historians aren't statisticians. And I'm a statistician, so we view things differently. And you got to look at history more as a process than as some kind of textbook museum description of things. In 2007, when I published The Black Swan, it's an old book now, strangely, it came back to the bestseller list not long after someone warned me. He said, your tweets are going to make your books extinct, okay, out of print. Okay, anyway, so it looks like things are working in reverse. So the United States had about 20% of the world economy. I'm using purchasing power parity, which is the most rational one. Europe, same thing. What's Europe now? What's EU now? 20%. And China, 6%. Now the US is about, 15%? And declining, dropping. Europe is about 14%. And really dropping. And what's China? North of 20%. Okay? So I'm talking about within the life of a book, right? Okay. So you think that the future is going to be any different? Or there's something called compound growth. A very small differential in growth can produce monstrously large outcomes. And this is what Warren Buffett discovered, okay, over time. So when we talk about the next generation, even half a generation from today, we know who's going to dominate the planet. Okay? Someone may argue, well, PPP, is not real, it's real dollars. Even in real dollars, the story is similar. But the other thing I'm going to say now that we're talking about weapons, about PPP, how much will it cost to produce this chair probably made in China? Probably cost $1 there. How much would it cost to make that chair here? A lot. I mean, and in the military, apply that to the military, we spend what, about $1 trillion? How much do the Chinese spend? About a third of that. Just compare the prices, what they get for a third of that. And you realize who is the real superpower or getting to be a superpower. And if it's not a superpower now, wait about 2 hours, I don't know, or 2 weeks, or maybe 2 months, just like we see buildings coming out of nowhere. Now, this is not pro-China, anti-China. This is just a description. And as I noticed in The Black Swan, we have difficulties dealing with time, with projecting things with time. The way we project how things will happen based on a very primitive analysis of the past, no consideration of second-order effects. So this is, And now you can expect that this meeting about war may have to take place in Beijing, because you may find it more important to convince them than a bunch of people in Washington who are overpaid because of, and then we have disease they don't have. The three diseases we have. The first one is education cost. 100,000, you know what they produce for, as a professor, we have students coming in, very qualified. How much does their education cost? It's not one order of magnitude, it's two order of magnitude less. Okay, the second point is healthcare. By now, China is 20% of the Nature Index in publication, largely in biology and medicine. Okay, so you know that their healthcare is improving very fast, and you know how much cheaper it is for them to do business. And the third problem is the military. They don't yet have the $53,000 trash can. You remember years ago the $3,000 toilet seat, that caused uproar. It got worse. Well, you got to imagine that the $53,000 trash can is going to get worse. That was what Boeing, charged taxpayer. So that's point number two. That was point number two. Point number three, there is an S-curve in life, in biology, everywhere. This I discussed in Anti-Fragile in great details. That things go up with accelerating returns, it's a convex curve, and then it slows down. And you got to imagine that too applies to economic growth. Once you have a 2-car garage, do you want to have a 5-car garage? Maybe, yeah, some people like to have 5 cars, all right? Some people collect cars. But in general, the incentive is not there. So China is growing fast. Why? Because they still have people who don't have a car. Okay, don't have a car garage, so it's still growing, okay? They got a lot of people. And you can, you have your own growth to take into consideration. So, whereas whereas Europe, they have their 1 month vacation. They'd like to grow, but there's no incentive. So you have diminishing growth, and it's entirely healthy. You reach destination. It applies to your life, same thing with food. You don't have food, you want a lot of food, and then you saturate. Now, what is the problem there? The problem is that it is the countries that have reached saturation that have the most amount of debt. And that's when you need to grow. There's a French expression, one only lends to the rich people. So the problem is you get rich, and then you borrow a lot. And then now you need to grow. And how are you going to grow? Okay? And of course, you have blunders like by this current government. They don't realize that the aim of these tariffs is to prevent growth. Why? Because the economy has 4% unemployment. So if you're going to have someone who's a brain surgeon, you're going to have to move resources into lower margin items. Of course, you're going to slow down economic growth. It's the equivalent of asking for more balance a brain surgeon to become a gardener once a week, take care of his garden or her garden, on grounds that he's already ripped off by gardeners. You got to do it yourself. That's the reasoning of the Trump administration. But that depresses GDP. So it's gonna, I'm sure there are economists. Yeah, I disagree with the economic establishment. At that point, that's pretty much orthodox economics. So we have a problem now with debt, metastatic government, and of course, irresponsible fiscal policy, all right? And we don't have the political mechanism to correct for that. Okay, hence I'm here, because people can understand that debt is maybe interesting when you're growing in the lower part of the S curve, but it's a bad thing up top, and you got to do something quickly, because soon most of our expenditure will be servicing the debt. But there's a problem. And what is the problem? Is that you got to borrow, no? Now you depend on borrowing, and guess what? You need foreigners or locals to buy your debt. Now, what did former President Joseph Biden do in 2022? He convinced any human being on the planet who is not part of the U.S. government to avoid U.S.-denominated assets. Why? Because if you freeze assets in your own currency, you're discouraging anyone from. It's no longer a safe currency. Because you had breakfast with the first cousin of someone who knew Putin when he was a student in St. Petersburg, now your assets are frozen. Okay, what are you gonna do? Avoid the dollar, hence go where? Gold. So we have more and more transactions conducted in US dollars nominally with the money stored in gold. And guess what? By forcing the EU to do the same, and even Switzerland to freeze assets, you're basically convincing people that that's what we got to do. So gold rallied now about, 35%? And all central bank reserves and the BRICS are moving into gold. Okay? Now, not counting the new, I would say schizophrenic, or I would say random rather than schizophrenic, because schizophrenia has this pattern, but here is random. Our new random president is definitely convincing people to stay even further away than the previous, less random, but more predictable, but of course, no less nefarious one. That's number 3. As I said, there's an S curve, and you got a problem from that. Now, point number 4, immigration or migrations, here in Western Europe, anywhere. When the economy becomes mature, it so happens that fewer people are interested in cleaning bathrooms. They're more interested in teaching medieval history than cleaning bathrooms. Do you want to blame them for that? Okay, so you run out of people to clean the streets. You don't yet have robots to do that. And what do? And then you don't have domestic servants, so you import people, okay? Hence, immigration in mature economies, Western Europe, and dependence on that immigration. In the US, I tend to ride my bicycle because I became a cyclist since 2018, which changes my life. So I added more books and, of course, the activity of cycling. So I go to neighborhoods, and all I see is Latin American workers. I mean, I didn't ask them for their immigration status, but I think I can, just looking at the statistics, make my own inference. So now, what happens if you deport a substantial number of these people? Have a brain surgeon, as I said, will have to do what? To go mow the lawn, learn masonry, and, and then, of course, empty the garbage can. That's stuff like that the brain surgeons prefer to delegate, no? Now, and then you know what happened during COVID when we had a small little shortage of labor? What happened to prices? Restaurants had to close because waiters were asking an astronomical number of dollars. Well, that's what would happen without immigration. This is what's not sinking in, that it's fine. You want to be an ethno-state, you're welcome, free, it's freedom. But what comes with it is that you're going to have to teach your people to clean bathrooms, all right? So you got to decide. And it's a market that is on immigration. This is why Meloni got elected on a platform, an anti-immigration platform, and guess what? immigration increased in Italy, okay? And it would have been worse if Ukraine did not supply Western Europe with all these people eager to work, doing anything, okay? So that's the problem we have now with ICE. I mean, they fundamentally know that the U.S. economy would collapse without illegal immigrants simply because that's how it was built. You had to reverse, you have people have to have no lawn, you had to change the culture, reduce the size of houses, and live in prefabs. I mean, of course, prefabs would be made in China and shipped here, or maybe made in Mexico with Chinese equipment. But you can imagine what would happen if you want to restrict immigration. So you have this, you can't have the pie and eat it too. So what happens is that the solution they're opting for is a solution of humiliating the workers, but sort of keeping them here. Okay, that's what is happening with ICE. So someone is vicious and not far from here. I mean, you can ride a bike, to where the person is operating, and it looks like that's the only motive, because the economics doesn't match the output is not what is, so it's just simulating, or maybe getting for it. So we have a problem here and elsewhere. Now you say, okay, I want to be a museum state, and it's bad to have immigrants. That's fine. You kick the immigrants out, you have your museum state, and you say, okay, I'm not going to have economic growth, or maybe the GDP would go down by 30, 40%. That's fine, but you got to make your choices rationally, not like saying, I want to eat a cake, I skip the cake now. Lunch, I want to eat the cake, but I want to lose weight. Okay? There's no such thing as Ozempic for the economies, all right? So that was my point number 4. Point number 5. Now, let me enter the positive aspects of things. The last 100 years or so, we were victims of the media, in the sense that you go home, sit, eat your TV thing, and a victim of the media is a victim of course, the suppliers of TV dinners, where families of 4 would sit down and communicate with the rest of the world. Actually, not communicate, just receive without communicating. But traditionally, the way we humans received information was by trading it. You go to the barber shop, you go to the fishmonger, and you get all the rumors, and you convey rumors, okay? So you were both a conveyor and recipient of information. That was the old model. It was destroyed by state media or by big media, where you sit down and you have someone lecturing you, and then you turn the TV off and then you go to bed, all right? Or you have your nightcap and then go to bed, whatever, depending on your lifestyle. So now what we have, TikTok, Schmicktalk, Google stuff, where you're both conveying information and receiving information. And that's so natural, and it's impossible to control the social media. Even with all their techniques, it's not easy to control social media. And even more difficult to control AI, because then you start having incoherent outcomes if you control AI. It's a little technical, but for now, let me explain that Gaza happened. They should have done the ethnic cleansing of Gaza in, I would say, 97. It would have worked. Okay, you have ABC News, CBS, all that would have covered for them. Okay, but you can't do it in 2025 because of social media. You can't control social media. Even if they can bowdlerize, they can censor, well, it's still, okay? So this is a good point, because someone was talking to me about the media in Washington, and I told him the only people who care about the media are people who are either in a wheelchair or in politics, okay? So other than that, anyone under the age of 31 and a half has no idea what ABC News means. Okay, and even, I mean, I never watched TV, but even people, my generation, a lot of people don't watch TV anymore. So this is positive, because here we have I mean, I got here via Twitter. Okay, so I didn't get here via conventional methods. So that's, now number 6. When we talk about governments, you go to history books and you talk about Henry VIII and this and that, and the King of France, Colbert. You're talking about different notion of government. Today in Europe, the government represents about 55% of GDP. In France, it depends if you count education or not, up to 70%, I don't know. It depends how you count, say high numbers. And here in the US, it's actually higher than reported, because the government is involved indirectly, and plus you have local government, you got to add that up. 100 years ago, it was mostly under 10% and often under 5% of GDP. So you realize that the government role had been creeping up in things that you know, so when we talk about a dictatorial government in 1900, they couldn't control that much because that was not much of the economy. That was not a large share of the economy compared to today. So government has been creeping up as just, even in economies deemed to be driven by Adam Smith, all right? Government has been creeping up. So this is something you can't stop. Please let me know before we're finished. And then finally, point number 7 is scale matters as a central element of any description. And let me say so. I had an aphorism inspired by 2 brothers, and I was arguing with them and about who's libertarian, not libertarian, why the size and the scale matters. And the aphorism came out like, I'm libertarian at a national level, national meaning US, a Republican at a state level, Democrat at a municipal level, and communist at a family level, all right? So you can be, and based on, so basically it depends on scale where you want the government to be, because sometimes you can't escape government. If you're a member of a country club, they have a government, they have the rules, enforcement, all of that, okay? So, but this is not a trivial point, because when we compare countries, when we look at the successes of nation states, all right, the ones that had been successful are tiny ones. Okay, so not, or within tiny ones, city-states, the city-state model has worked beautifully in history. And when we look at the success of Dubai, because it's small, all right, Dubai, Singapore is small. Okay. Venice was small and lasted 1,000 years. So we look at successful models of governance, okay, you always see scale. And what's happening is that with the growth of the US economy, and of course, hence the complexity of it, we are going away from governance naturally. And so you need even more drastic control of the US government than we have had to have in say, 40 years or 50 years ago. So I don't know, the questions are not allowed, I think, no? No, okay, so no questions. So thank you very much. I think I'm done. So 7 points.